Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of BacklogBusters, where I'm busting out my gaming backlog one video at a time and letting you know if after all these years, these games are worth playing today. In today's episode, we're chasing crocodiles across an entire island in search of our daily dose of potassium in Donkey Kong Country. Why am I playing Donkey Kong Country today? Well, I was more partial to a certain plumber as a kid, so anytime I had access to a Super Nintendo, I mostly spent my time playing Super Mario World or something like that. I've barely played Donkey Kong Country, never even making it past the first world. But thanks to all of you in the comments, the Donkey Kong Country games are by far the most requested game y'all have asked for. So I'm finally playing this game for the first time in the year 2023. Donkey Kong Country was released for the Super Nintendo on November 21st, 1994 in North America, then on the 24th in Europe, and the 26th in Japan. It was developed by Rivera, who have made several of the games I've played through on this channel, all of which have been incredible so far. And this was Rare's third Super Nintendo release, and the first Super Nintendo game published by Nintendo themselves. Donkey Kong Country received glowing praise at the time of its release, and several Game of the Year awards. And according to Wikipedia, it achieved commercial success, being the number 3 best-selling game on the Super Nintendo. And because of this success, it was quickly followed by 2 sequels over the next 2 years. The first game was released in a pivotal moment for Nintendo, as fully 3D consoles were beginning to launch around this time, with the PlayStation 1 hitting store shelves in Japan only a month after Donkey Kong Country's release, and the N64 is not far behind in 1996. So is this game caught between a generational leap, or is it still a game worth playing in 2023? Let's find out, starting with the things that I liked. The little I played of Donkey Kong Country back in the day, I never really clicked with, and I always just wanted to put Super Mario World back in the Super Nintendo instead. But wow, I was really missing out by just replaying the first couple levels of Super Mario World over and over, because once I came to terms with this game and the fact that it isn't Super Mario, I loved how it felt to play. You've got a jump, a crouch, a throw, which are all things I've done in most Mario games, if not most platformers, but there's something special here. The way you learn to roll and leap out of it for a long jump, or chain together big bounces off enemies and objects in the environment. I was shocked to find that I actually enjoyed bouncing off tires, when I've got a history of disdain and confusion for the music blocks in Super Mario 3, I could just never get the hang of. I felt more in control when underwater than I have in most 2D Mario games as well. And sure, sometimes I wish that I could infinitely roll or swim through water like a dolphin like you can in the later Donkey Kong Returns series, but the platforming in this held up extremely well, with just the basic movement feeling as fun and responsive as any Mario game, if not more so in some of these areas. And much like the Mario games of the time, I think Donkey Kong Country does a really good job of setting up levels and scenarios that use its mechanics and just test your platforming skills in such a way that by the end of the game, you'll know how to leap through the tiniest gap, over an obstacle with the perfect bounce, and the game can even just turn off the lights on you completely and you'll still know where you're gonna land. I was a little worried when going back to play this game because I've never really appreciated the pre-rendered sprite look, where an image of a 3D model basically has its picture taken in different poses or at points in its animation. Then those images are placed in a 2D game. To me, it always felt like a cheap trick that never looked as good as real 3D models or as good as normal pixel art in something like Secret of Mana or Yoshi's Island, or even games with a little more clean and simple pixel art like Super Mario World or Mega Man X. Maybe I was just burned by later examples like the pre-rendered, emotionless, plastic-looking characters in Sonic 4, or the weird cutout look that this method gives off, while lacking the charm of something like Paper Mario. But after playing more of the game, I've come to terms with the fact that I was wrong. This wasn't some cheaper alternative lacking in charm or interesting animations. This is a really visually impressive game all the way through. I was won over by the little background details like swinging lights, spinning barrels, the fun bouncy animation of the tires, but most of all by the enemies and characters in this game, from the chomping little crocodiles who should take the Borderlands series to court over the name Claptrap, to the giant disembodied bird head Master Necky. Then you've got Cranky Kong, who never leaves his rocking chair, but waves his cane at you in a very disapproving way, or Donkey Kong and Diddy Kong's furious tantrums they throw when discovering their stolen bananas. Even Diddy's death animation is surprisingly lighthearted and fun. Then there's stuff that's more impressive from a technical perspective, like a game of red light, green light, which basks the level in that color so you can know if you're in danger or not. Or the warping underwater effect applied to the screen when you're swimming deep in the coral reef with bubbles rising from your Kong and, I guess, the fish below. Even the levels in complete darkness feature shimmering little background lights in addition to enemy teeth and eyes that shine through the pitch black. Or levels that find you platforming through a thunderstorm with pouring rain, flashes of lightning, only to have it transition to a bright shining day by the end. There are some instances where the characters display odd visual seams that distract a little bit, but they're few and far between, and some levels do go a little bit overboard with effects like this blizzard animation that's really hard to see through, which might be the point. I was just constantly impressed at how detailed the world, characters, and enemies were in this game, and even though I assume this game might show its age more than others from this era, I've really come to appreciate this game and what it managed to pull off when it originally released, and I still find it very impressive today. Besides the visuals though, there are a lot of other little details in this game that really won me over. Like, I didn't expect Donkey Kong and Diddy Kong to actually control differently between the two of them, with Diddy feeling slightly faster with longer jumps but being weaker overall, forcing you to bounce on some enemies twice or even getting knocked back when you try to attack them. Donkey Kong, on the other hand, is a little bit slower, has a shorter jump, and a slower roll, but he can take out most enemies in a single bounce. Also, discovering that you can swap between them at almost any time caught me by surprise and gives you flexibility to choose Diddy for maybe a tricky platforming section or Donkey Kong for a heavy combat section, and it added more strategy to an individual level than I would have ever expected. There are some details I could probably do without, like the horrifying realization that when you find a DK barrel, you can hear either Diddy or DK trapped inside, calling for help and thrashing around to try to escape their imprisonment, before I assume they just run out of air. This reveals a much darker side to the Kremlin's plan, distracting us with the theft of bananas when instead their true goal is to bury us alive. When you're outside of the normal levels though, you can get advice from Cranky Kong, which varies from just general control advice like me not knowing you could run until I was specifically told, to hints on how to find secrets in the levels, which may or may not be helpful as I've never managed to actually track down a secret based on any of Cranky's hints. But even without those hints, these levels are filled with secrets, some marked by bananas and hiding a blast barrel, some requiring a projectile to open a cave to another area, and some just require a leap of faith. These secrets typically lead you to a fun minigame, some of which I could never get the timing down on, or barrels that will conveniently launch you past a difficult section of a level. Every time I managed to find one of these secrets, which wasn't super often as I seem to be bad at locating them, I just felt super accomplished and always received a good reward or at least a fun distraction. I am a little confused about how you're replenishing this banana hoard, as each time you defeat a boss inside their warehouse of stolen goods, they drop a massive banana, 2 to 3 times your size. And where did this come from? They aren't shown in the hoard at the start of the game, or once you recover them at the end. Do these somehow convert into smaller bananas, like getting change for paper money, maybe? And if they weren't from your hoard, where did these come from? I can only hope we find answers in the next game. Rare was also apparently not satisfied with just having 2 playable characters, also wanting to outdo Super Mario World's single Yoshi, with 3 separate rideable characters, a rhino for smashing through obstacles and enemies, a ostrich for leaping over and flying past everything, and a dolphin that makes short work of enemies in underwater levels, especially because you can't attack without them. There's just a ton here to make the world, levels, and gameplay feel more interesting throughout the entire adventure. I'm very nostalgic for Mario music. 1, 2, and 3 all have extremely memorable tracks, and in general, I love that chiptune music of the 8 and 16-bit eras. But typically when I listen to a game's soundtrack outside of the game, it's from the N64 era or above, like Mario 64, Ocarina of Time, or Banjo-Kazooie. But I've heard great things about Donkey Kong Country's soundtracks through the years, and I have played Donkey Kong Country Returns and Tropical Freeze, which all sounded incredible. But going back to the Super Nintendo, I did not expect the music to be this good and this high quality in this game. The soothing underwater themes, the incredible catchy main theme, and the way songs set a mood for the level you're in is really impressive. And although I can't share much of the music as I'm worried I'll trigger some copyright strike, I feel like I could easily be convinced this soundtrack came from an entirely different, more modern time, because it honestly sounds out of place here, being so good and so different than most Super Nintendo games I've played. Now, there are some things that I disliked about this game, starting with how it took me a while to learn where a ledge ends and begins, and also how much space your character takes up on those areas. With the levels having this pseudo 3D look, all the ledges are at about 45-degree angle, let's say, so where is your character in relation to this perspective? You can't angle a camera to get a better view, and since there's no shadow to tell me where to land, it took me a while to get used to this perspective and the style. For instance, in a Mario game, I know a ledge ends right on this pixel. But with the way the stages and characters are designed here, you've almost got to learn where your character fits somewhere in the middle of this 45-ish degree angle. So you aren't aiming for the top corner of a ledge or the bottom corner, but somewhere in between. And while I mostly got used to it, some platforms, ledges, and areas were just really hard to judge where a ledge began or ended and caused a lot of accidental deaths when I thought I was safe. The first minecart level also gave me similar trouble, as I tried to judge when and where to jump. There's no air control when jumping in the car, which is rough if you've gotten used to being able to steer your character back onto a ledge while on your feet. You do get 2 hits with both Diddy and Donkey in the car, but the number of obstacles and pitfalls in this level quickly led to my first game over screen and my second and my third. I just had trouble telling how early or late I needed to jump to clear enemies because I was so used to the normal character size, and this big square cart is a whole different thing and you have to learn to control it. I especially had trouble judging when to jump over gaps in rails. In normal levels you can jump after a roll while suspended in midair, but in a cart there's no such mechanic and you'll just drop like a rock. Eventually I started staring at the back wheel, and sure enough, I wasn't able to jump even when that wheel was still on the rail. So maybe it was the front wheel that matters, and yep, that seems to be it. Once the front wheel comes off a rail, you're dead if you haven't jumped already. So now I knew how to clear gaps. Yay. But there's still a whole level here, with crocs that come seemingly out of nowhere with no warning and almost no time to react. Am I just terrible at this, or is it pure memorization and trial and error? You do get a checkpoint halfway through the level, like normal, but there didn't seem to be nearly as many DK barrels strewn throughout the level to replenish your Kong supply in the minecart. So while on most levels it felt like I could take 4 to 6 hits while replenishing on barrels throughout the level, in the cart level it felt like you could only take 2 hits before you're dead. I did come back the next day and beat the level on my first try after taking a break, but I didn't even entertain the idea of collecting all the Kong letters and instead just moved on, out of spite. Speaking of things coming out of nowhere, that doesn't just happen in the mines, but also on several other levels, with a mix of kremlings, snakes, pits, and other dangerous things appearing so suddenly on screen that they are very hard to avoid. It made me wonder if you just have to memorize enemy placement and every jump you need, and then die, get a teeny bit further next life, and then do this on repeat until you get to the end of the level. Because several levels felt like this to me, small progress sprinkled with death until I could make it through a whole level with almost no mistakes. And in some specific instances, I was having to memorize whether I needed to actually hold A to bounce higher or just do a normal bounce off a specific enemy's head, because the next platform that might be off screen is so specifically placed, and if you guessed wrong, you're starting the level over, or checkpoint. There are some times when it felt like the game was just out to trick you. Enemies that are hard to see, but pelt you with items, and more. But because you can visit Candy Kong in between each level, you won't lose too much progress if you hit a game over, so these tough one-off levels didn't cause that much stress at first. But after you defeat a boss, you go to a new world, and you cannot leave that world until you find Funky Kong, and you cannot save until finding Candy Kong. So this leaves you having to finish about 3 or more levels in a row without a game over. And it gets pretty tough towards the end of the game when the difficulty increases, which leads to more retries and more memorization on my part, and this really made me wish that you could travel between worlds without Funky Kong and utilize the Candy Kong save at any time. Now, with all that in mind, how did I feel about this game overall, and would I recommend Donkey Kong Country as a game that should be on your backlog? Yes, if you like platformers and have skipped this one, I think it's more than worth going back to, even if it takes a little getting used to, especially if all your adventures have involved a plumber up until this point. The art, music, and little details throughout a varied collection of levels make this really enjoyable, and even though I was convinced going in that this art style would not hold up and was only impressive for the time between 2D and 3D games, there's a surprising amount of charm, impressive design, and effects that make this game still hold up in my mind. Now, if you're used to a flatter looking 2D platformer, you might struggle like I did to get acclimated to this pseudo 3D style, which makes it a little hard to judge some platforming sections. And if you're not experienced with 2D platformers, you might bounce off when the trial and error nature of some later levels show up and the difficulty increases, with what in my opinion felt like a lack of save points. But I had a great time with this game overall, and I did not expect to enjoy it this much. I fully expected to listen to some good music in between being extremely frustrated by difficult platforming, and don't get me wrong, it does get hard, But I felt like the difficulty of the game was maybe built up in my mind a little bit and worried me more than it should have. But the platforming still feels great, and I'm really glad I went back to play this game. Plus, I'm even more interested in checking out the rest of the series now. And I'll throw out my normal message, that my opinion on this game is not meant to tarnish any fond memories you have of playing this. And if you loved or still love this game, please tell me why in the comments below. I'd love to hear more about your experience and talk about the parts that I also really liked. Now, if you're interested in playing or replaying Donkey Kong Country, there are luckily easy to access modern options. It's appeared on most of Nintendo's consoles, either through ports or virtual console services. And today, the easiest place to find it is on the Nintendo Switch Online subscription service, where you'll get the normal suite of features, save states that you can use anywhere, which would have been very handy, and the ability to rewind and undo a death near the end of a really hard level. None of which I got to use because all the footage I've shown is from my physical cartridge that I've had for years and never played up until this point. But the save states would have been so much nicer to make the gauntlet of 3-ish hard levels before a save point a lot smoother for me at least. So if you'd like a little bit smoother difficulty curve, go ahead and take advantage of those optional features, or completely ignore them if you want a harder challenge. But that's it for this episode of Backlog Busters. Have you played Donkey Kong Country? What did you think? Is it a must-play game that deserves to be on others' backlogs? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to talk more about this game. Also, let me know if you have any suggestions for a game that I should clear off my backlog next, and I'll work to make a video on it. And if you enjoyed this video, please hit the thumbs up button, and if you'd like to see more, please stick around and subscribe. And if you want to get alerted the second my next video comes out, hit the bell icon. And as always, thank you all so much for watching, and see you in the next video.